disrupted.
America that I fuck.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. It's been a fantastic day so far. So finally, folks, end of March into April 2024, finally, we are getting word that the COVID vaccines didn't actually stop transmission. What? But I heard from Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes and Lawrence O'Donnell and all the people at CTV and CBC and Justin Trudeau and Theresa Tam and Anthony Fauci. Turns out we were right. It's still safe and effective, I gotta tell you that. As we're approaching number 10 on the vaccine. Number 10 or number 9? I think we're at 10 already. Because that shows how effective they are and how it just stops COVID dead hard. Well, here's the official word from the Epoch Times saying no evidence COVID-19 vaccines stop transmission when authorized. The federal government confirms. Woo! God forbid now we finally get the word after everybody pretty much in Canada has had one case of COVID. It's good to know that after the mandates, the lockdowns, the imprisonment of the truckers and people responsible to Merrill Lynch trials, it's good to know finally that after everyone's got COVID, everyone went through this mayhem, people are realizing that it doesn't matter if you're vaxxed or not, it was going to happen regardless. Now they're finally coming to terms and be like, yeah, we can't hide this any longer. It's so good to know the federal government is pointing out the obvious at this time. So it says the health minister's representative in the House of Commons has confirmed that COVID-19 vaccines were approved without evidence they prevent transmission. At the time of initial authorization of the first COVID-19 vaccines, Pfizer-BioNTech, in December 2020, there was no report evidence on the effectiveness of the authorized COVID-19 vaccine to prevent asymmetric infection, to reduce viral shedding, or to prevent transmission, Liberal MP Yazir Nabki said in the House on March 22nd. Mr. Nabki, who serves as parliamentary secretary to Health Minister Mark Holland, was providing a response to formal questions from Tory MP Colin Carey filed in an order paper. Mr. Nabki elaborated that in February and March of 2021, a few months after vaccines were first authorized, preliminary data from the ongoing clinical trials showed a lower prevalence of SARS-CoV-2 infection in asymptomatic participants in the short term. Controversy around the issue of vaccines not being tested to stop transmission erupted in October 2022 when Dutch member of the European Parliament, Rob Roos, reported that a Pfizer executive had testified in a hearing that studies on transmission have not been performed initially. The executive said such trials had not been required to provide products to market. But it's warp speed. It's warp speed. We don't have the time to actually permit science. We don't have the time to test. It's warp speed. We had to get it out fast. You guys will be the lab rats. You guys figure out if it was safe or effective. Wow. Mr. Carey sought to confirm the matter with the Canadian government and find out that what evidence it had. He also asked why in the event of the absence of evidence about prevention of transmission, there was a public messaging suggesting that herd immunity was achievable through mass vaccination. Mr. Roos had raised a similar concern, pointing to Dutch leaders who said that one gets vaccinated not only to protect oneself, but to protect others, or that not getting vaccinated is an antisocial act. So that was the garbage they fed you beforehand. And when I started reading into COVID, when I first took the 2 Pfizer shots that I got and started looking into it, it came to me, it dawned on me, because I was, reading about things and then also looking at observations, that it didn't stop transmission, that all this was a complete lie, that they had to, separate the vaccinated from the unvaccinated, and you weren't allowed to. So the whole vaccine passport idea, or allowing vax people to enter into stores or markets or malls, was just complete made up BS. It was completely fabricated because there was no scientific data or analysis to point all that out. Same with the 6 feet rule. They never guaranteed a scientific evidence based assumption that we had to be 6 feet apart, but they just made it up. They fabricated it. So it's just amazing. Throughout the pandemic, government officials say that the only way they can get through the pandemic was for everyone to be vaccinated. We all need us to get vaccinated as quickly as possible so we can get back to normal, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said in May of 2021 during the initial vaccine rollout. Mr. Trudeau said at the time that every vaccine approved by Health Canada is safe and effective. When responding to whether there was a contradiction between the National Advisory Council on Immunization Guidance and Health Canada, the NACI had just recommended against the AstraZeneca vaccine for those under 55 or over rare causes for serious blood clots, while Health Canada said it could be given to anyone over 18. So that's a little something that we weren't warned about here in Canada, that, hey, there was a big contradiction. That when we first rolled out the AstraZeneca, maybe we should have rolled that back, because the Immunization Council knew that there was some sort of side effect that should be addressed to everybody. That, hey, maybe instead of getting these injections, you think about what causes you're getting, think about the side effects that could possibly harm you, and then think for yourself that maybe you should get it or not. But they didn't tell you that. They didn't tell you any of that. They just told you that this is the smart way to do, that if you get injected, somehow it's going to protect everybody else. That made absolutely no sense. It made absolutely no sense that a vaccine inside, like, again, that's not how vaccines work. That's not how medicine works. If you get the injection, you're protecting your body. It's not protecting anyone else's body. So that product and the one from Johnson & Johnson use the same vector-based technology, were eventually all but pulled from use, with mRNA injections being prompted instead. They are no longer authorized for use in Canada, with both companies canceling their authorizations in 2023. All of the COVID-19 vaccines were approved in record time through an irregular process. Irregular. Like testing. Actually scientific analysis. Medical inquiries. That kind of stuff. Something that would actually be approved in regular studies, but we had to go in the speed of science. That allowed manufacturers to skip testing steps to bring their products to market. Health Canada allowed for rolling submissions of clinical trial data to come in as the vaccines were not already in use, but are also being mandated. Meanwhile, Pfizer-BioNTech's major clinical trials were conducted with batches manufactured under what it called Process 1. To upscale production, a different process was used Process 2, which didn't undergo similar testing, Health Canada has previously confirmed. Efficacy, safety, and immunogenicity, that was a big word, was demonstrated using clinical batches of vaccine, wrote the European Medicines Agency in a 2021 assessment report. The commercial batches were produced using a different process, and the comparability of these two processes relies on demonstration of comparable biological, chemical, and physical characterizations of the active substance and finished product. And isn't it amazing that after all this, after everybody has had, side effects, that after all the lockdowns, the mandates, the fighting, the trucker convoy, the imprisonment of the trucker convoy, the separation, the division that screwed society a new one, that now we're finally understanding that all this was BS. Now that, we're up to number 10 on the vaccine scale, and there's still people out there, not a lot of people, but there's a kind of slim minority of individuals that are still telling you it's safe and effective. That this is definitely worth the while. Now, I can tell you it's very safe and effective. I'm just reading this article for the sake of reading this article. You decide for yourself whether you think it's safe and effective. I can tell you it's just glorious. It's wonderful. And it not only slows transmission, it stops transmission. And here to prove that argument is the lovely, talented Rachel Maddow, Miss Science herself, who's going to tell you straight up on how great the eradication of COVID is going if everyone just gets this jab. Watch this.
Instead of the virus being able to hop from person to person to person, potentially mutating and becoming more virulent and drug resistant along the way, now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else. It cannot use a vaccinated person as a host to go get more people. That means the vaccines will get us to the end of this if we just go fast enough to get the whole population. Instead of the virus.
So that goes on the rhetoric of, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. If everyone just gets the jab, then we're saved. And then they realize that whether you get 40 jabs or 0 jabs, everybody got some symptom of COVID. Everybody was going to get it. And the more that COVID went on, the weaker the strain got. And that's what people like Rachel Maddow and the mainstream media will never tell you directly, because you're listening to this from the advertisement of pharmaceuticals. This is Rachel Maddow doing an advertisement for the pharmaceutical lobby, because she's not a scientist. She's not providing data. She's not showing you articles or medical reports that prove her argument. She's saying that you get jabbed, it's going to stop. And then it won't spread. It won't spread. If everyone just gets it. Warp speed. And here's also Mr. Fancy Pants, Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister, again, saying the exact similar thing, even though they knew this from the start. They knew this. They didn't want it to release to the public. That's why it's so safe and effective that they would never release the data for another 75 years. That proves how safe everything is. When they can't tell you something for 75 years, and they have to have a bunch of lawyers lock it up, put it in a box, and throw it over the river to make sure that nobody, no doctors, no lawyers, nobody looks at the data. Because it's so safe and effective.
For people who continue to hesitate or to choose not to get vaccinated, they are losing privileges to do certain things, whether it's get on a train or a plane, whether it's travel internationally, whether it's move forward in a job in the public service, or even have a job in the public service. This Quebec proposal is...
And again, if the vaccines were actually stopping transmission, then why did they had to do the authoritarian measure of separating people? Why did they have to go the extra step of separating society from one another? Why did they have to deem people that didn't get vaccinated against away from the vaccinated people? If they claim that once you get jabbed, it's going to stop the virus cold, then why did they go through all these measures? Because it didn't. Because the transmission, that statement, was a lie. And they knew this. They knew this from the start. They knew this from doctors. They knew this because Dr. Robert Malone, pointed this out from the start. And he is the inventor of the technology that brought us the COVID vaccines. Would we not be listening to him rather than Anthony Fauci, who has been a serial pathological liar his entire career? Ever since he got into the field of medicine, ever since he got into the field of politics, the whole gain of... You've been lied to this entire time about COVID. And we're finally getting the approved data. We're finally hearing out. The establishment is finally folded. They can't hide this any longer. Just like how they're trying to hide us earlier during the pandemic by saying you can't read on this. You can't investigate. Don't do your own research. Which used to be reading. Which used to be a very, very acceptable measure. Because when it comes to your health, when it comes to you as a patient, you have every authority. You had bodily autonomy to tell your doctor if you want to be injected with this. You had every right as an individual. That went away. That went away when it came to these mandates, when it came to the authoritarian measures that were locked intact with this scenario. And they lied to you ever since. And now that's 2024. Now that people are waking up to this, people are now skeptical of this. They finally realize that something isn't right because the vaccine, the people lining up for vaccines is dropping. So obviously something's ticking in people's brain to realize that, hey, we got to be done with this. That maybe 5 is enough, or 6 is enough, or 1 was enough, or not get any. Then now people are waking up to realize that all this was a hoax. All this was manufactured. All this was fabricated on the lies and disparity to put us against one another, to mandate authoritarian measures that would divide society forever. And they're still trying to push it. They're still trying to push it, even though the CDC said COVID's over. The CDC said that there's no longer a threat to COVID. They're still enacting authoritarian measures past the pandemic. Because they're going to use this and they're going to abuse this for as long as they can to put us against each other. And that's why the Freedom Convoy showed the world, not just Canada, but around the world, of how powerful unity can be when it comes to authoritarian measures and manufactured lies done by the state to oppress you. That people were not going to roll over, that they knew something was up, and they knew that there needs to be accountability, which there never will be. There never will be. But it's good to know that people are willing to speak out. It's good to know that there's people that are actually doing the research, that are following the data, they're actually examining the virus of what it was, and they're getting away from the medical tyranny of pharmaceuticals and listening to true professionals and doing their own research to better understand their health and their judgment when it comes to this pandemic. But it's sad that 2024, now we're finally getting the establishment to refer to common sense again. That, hey, maybe after the 10th time that people get jabbed, maybe it wasn't actually stopping the virus. Maybe. But let's say that, YouTube, for the sake of YouTube, it's very safe and effective.